Hi everyone, Alexandra Jowett, Jupiter Returns here with your weekly astrology forecast. It's going to be slightly longer this week. It's a quite remarkable week, a lot going on astrologically. We've got an eclipse coming up, a very, very potent moment in the Saturn-Pluto cycle, which I do intend to just give you a little bit of extra depth and coverage of. So the latter part of my of this video will be around the Saturn and Pluto conjunction, which astrologers, you know, if you've been tapped into the world of astrology, you will know this is a peak moment that a lot of astrologers have been considering, talking about for essentially the last couple of years, really. So it's a really important influence for us right now, and I thought that that really deserved a little bit of extra attention. So I'll put that towards the end and crack on. So today, Monday the 6th, we started the day with the moon in Taurus. She's happy there. Taurus is a grounding energy. It's one of the earth signs. The earth signs in green on my chart is Taurus, Capricorn and Virgo. So the moon is exalted in Taurus. Taurus is ruled by Venus, and it helps to just stabilize emotions. The bad news, though, was early this morning, she was in a square aspect up there to Venus in Aquarius. These two are fixed signs as well, so that adds a bit of strength into that kind of tense aspect. And this can essentially make us feel like love, like peace, like harmony is kind of out of reach a little bit, like we're always kind of just missing it. And there can just be a feeling of there being a lack of peace and harmony. It can be quite stimulating, though, for artistic type activities. So you may have benefited from that if you're involved in any of the arts. The real kind of thing that I've got my eye on today, though, is a very tense type of connection. Mars moved into Sagittarius recently, and you'll know that I talked about this as kind of weaponizing our fundamental beliefs and philosophies. Sagittarius is the sign of just those things, the sign of the foreign, the other, where we can broaden our minds through learning about different cultures. But it also can have quite a stubborn and sometimes quite a fundamental aspect to it as well. So it can kind of quite rigidly hold on to some of those beliefs. Mars moving in here can really stir up a lot of aggression and anger around where our beliefs are questioned or come into some kind of debate with someone else where their opinions and philosophies and beliefs don't meet with ours. Mars tends to the downside of Mars, the less desirable influences he can be are separation. So he rules knives and cutting things and sharpness. He's not about finding peace and harmony. That's Venus's job. So Mars here can sort of weaponize our words and our kind of our wanting to be the warrior and defend our firm beliefs. So what we've got happening today, we've got a building tense aspect over here. This is Uranus, okay? And Uranus is slowing right down now. Towards the end of the week, Uranus is going to go direct. So it's a more potent expression that it's giving us, more potent influence that we're receiving. What is Uranus all about? Well, Uranus is all about destabilizing. It's all about shocks and things happening very, very suddenly, as if they've come from out of nowhere. It's a radical energy. It wants change. It's not super happy in Taurus because Taurus, being a fixed sign, doesn't want change. So there's a lot of pent up kind of frustration here as Uranus is trying to bring about something new, something different, something fresh. And Taurus is just like, no, let's keep everything the same. So when we've got this quite radical, volatile and unstable energy from Uranus in a challenging aspect, this kind of conversation between these two planets is called the inconjunct. And what it essentially means is that these two influences just can't see eye to eye about anything. It would take a huge amount of adjustment, of change on someone's side for these guys to be able to meet in any kind of a harmonious way. So this is a very provocative kind of energy. So yeah, we're really looking at some very volatile energy. Now that's kind of starting, it's in its applying aspect phase today, i.e. it's not quite exact, it's building up. So there's this build up feeling. It can result in, you know, sudden outbursts, finding yourselves in really tense, explosive discussions with someone perhaps that can seem to come out of nowhere, that are kind of almost from an ego perspective, you know. This is kind of might, you know. Mars is all about I'm right, I am, okay, it's all about me and my ego and what I want and how I'm going to fight. So it can be this kind of quite closed-minded and unharmonious and uncompromising kind of energy. So unforeseen explosive outbursts, where there's differences in religions, differences in philosophies, in personal belief systems, and in different cultures, okay? The foreign, the different, the unusual. So look out for those. Uranus likes nothing more than a bit of rebellion and rule breaking. And this aspect will perfect as we move into Tuesday. On Tuesday the 7th, this will come exact, okay? Interestingly, challenging aspects between Uranus and Mars have shown up quite a lot in the charts of terrorists, and where there's just been like crazy unforeseen accidents. So this aspect is in Osama bin Laden's chart, the Anders Breivik guy who kind of run amok with a gun killing people, the incident with Superman, Simon Reeve, he has this in his chart, and that sudden from out of nowhere taking away his personal power, his muscles, literally he couldn't use his muscles anymore. So go steady, go careful. Mars rules, Mars in Uranus, this is an accident prone kind of energy. Be careful around heated discussions, but any kind of heat, anything sharp, anything mechanical. And also with Uranus, this is the digital world, the online world. So with Uranus and Mars, we can see this is cyber attacks, okay? The Mars being the attack. So attacks on financial systems, on computer systems, that kind of thing could absolutely take place under this kind of energy, which, as I say, peaks on Tuesday. Also on Tuesday, Tuesday the 7th of January, we have the moment where Jupiter, now in Capricorn, moves and meets up with the South Node. So as you know, this is the nodal axis, South Node in Capricorn, North Node in Cancer, the nodal axis. This is what creates our eclipses. When we have full moons and new moons in a close proximity to the nodes, that's what gives us an eclipse. So these tend to be very potent karmic points, fated, destined kind of events happen. So as each planet has moved over those points, they've put their own kind of essence into how things will play out. and this time it's Jupiter's turn, Jupiter being the ruler, of course, of Sagittarius. So I find that that kind of connection even more interesting. Jupiter on the nose, Jupiter will stay there now right through until the 12th. So throughout the eclipse at the end of the week, Jupiter will be at this point. So it's really calling us to ask, where are we on our progress with our beliefs? Where are we in terms of how our underlying convictions, essentially, that's what this is, are they holding us back? Are they helping us move forward? Where are we at with that? So give some consideration to that, and the whole of the essence of Jupiter, which is this Sagittarian wanting to expand, wanting to learn, wanting to grow, wanting to bring something better from greater exploration and greater personal experience. Okay, Jupiter Sagittarius doesn't want to learn through reading things in a book. Okay, that's Gemini, the opposite. That's the opposite. This is kind of the educational aspect, really. Gemini likes to read. Sagittarius would rather go out there into the world and have an adventure, have an experience, and expand themselves in that way. So give those things some consideration in terms of your own personal development. Also on Tuesday, the 7th, the moon will have finished her journey through Taurus and will move into the sign of Gemini. We know that she's now growing towards the full moon, okay? So the full moon, the eclipse, will be taking place in the next sign along Cancer. So she's really, really picking up some strong influence now. She's gaining in size. As we look into the night sky, you'll notice that she's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so her influence and the kind of the stirring of the waters that she brings is increasing in intensity. Okay, so in the sign of Gemini, it interests me, a lot of our world leaders at the moment have a fair amount of Gemini energy in their charts. And in fact, the last election that we had here in the UK was on the Gemini full moon. And our leader that was elected, Boris Johnson, is a Gemini, as is Donald Trump, as is Xi Jinping, the guy in charge of China. So there's a lot of Gemini energy. And what this means, at such a potent phase of the moon cycle, these Gemini individuals are likely going to have a lot more planets than just their sun in the sign of Gemini. So as the moon travels through Gemini, increasing and increasing and stirring up these emotions, it will move over all of their planets that they have in Gemini, which could be involved in as things unfold. And in fact, Boris Johnson himself, I noted when I was having a look at his chart earlier on, he also has a challenging aspect in his chart between Mars and Uranus. So it's a kind of a repeating theme there, that kind of volatility. I'm going to skip forward now to Thursday, which is the day that the moon actually moves into the sign of Cancer. In the sign of Cancer, that is her home ground. And this, of course, is this is the place where the eclipse is going to take place. So we're really moving into some potency now. At this point, when she first moves into Cancer, the first aspect that she's going to make is a challenge aspect, again, to Chiron, the wounded healer. Now, at the very early parts of Aries, Cancer, Capricorn, and Libra, this is what's known as the world axis. Okay, so things that happen here tend to have by the individual, tend to have a bigger impact in terms of worldwide consequences. And Chiron is our need to heal. It's our need to grow from the pain that we've had in the past and heal it and help others to heal by healing our own pain as well. So the healing efforts that we make affects everybody else around us. So the moon at this place could really stimulate those feelings of pain, bringing them up to the surface, washing it up. This is Cancer. This is a very emotional sign. Washing things up to the surface, because we can't heal things when they aren't bothering us. Unfortunately, it's just not the way human beings work. If everything's going along smoothly and fine, there tends not to be the motivation to do anything about anything. So don't look at this as being bad or negative. There are undesirable emotions, yes, but they're all super, super helpful. And usually we do the best work in the most difficult circumstances. So try and move away from that black and white polarization of good feelings and bad feelings. Everything is supportive, everything is helpful if we just, I guess, change our beliefs around it, change our attitude. Okay. As the moon moves on, she will cross the North Node there in Cancer. That's going to be later on in the evening, around 11 p.m. on Thursday. That's going to be quite a significant moment, I think, as we have this very, very fated, destined, karmic kind of point in time. And we're really, really moving into the eclipse energies now. Around this time also, Uranus is pretty much at a standstill, ready to move direct. And so again, the influence of Uranus is going to be pretty potent on Friday the 10th. So let's move Uranus now direct, and you will notice nothing retrograde on the board at all. It wasn't that long ago we were talking about, crikey, there's so much retrograde, you know, and nothing's happening, nothing's moving forward. Well, now we have the exact opposite. Everything in gold, everything is moving forward. So huge amount of progress to be made, a lot of forward and active kind of energy, particularly as we have so much in cardinal signs, which are really instigating and making something happen. So Friday the 10th, we actually have the lunar eclipse. The moon will have crossed the node overnight. And this eclipse is going to take place at 19 degrees of Cancer. So the moon in Cancer in opposition to the sun up there in Capricorn. That opposition is what creates the full moon. And we can tell from the name, the opposition, that that's why it can stir up quite a bit of tension. It's two opposing forces kind of having a face-off, essentially. It's the halfway point of the whole of the lunar cycle, and it's the peak moment. It's where everything that was started with the new moon has been growing and growing and growing and growing, and now it comes to this fruition point, this manifestation point, a culmination of energies. So it's a very peak, potent time off the backdrop of everything that we've got going on. And as the time moves on, she will then also come into opposition with Saturn and Pluto as well, who will at that point be almost at their point of conjunction. So to just give you an overview of how this eclipse kind of looks, I was asked around about a year or so ago to write some coverage for the Astrocal Lunar Diaries. Check them out, they're absolutely amazing. I strongly recommend them. So I did that coverage for the 2020 calendar diary, and I just read out what I wrote to you back then about this eclipse. So in the sign of Cancer, this eclipse kicks things off in a potent way, and the weeks surrounding it could be a peak moment in our history. Something ruled by the sign of Cancer is history. The sun is paired up with youthful trickster Mercury. Okay, this is called Cazimi, or where the effect of Mercury is kind of difficult to access. It's not predictable because it's gone behind the intense rays of the sun. Okay, so or combust is also known as. So Mercury Sun conjunction. So the sun is paired up with the youthful trickster Mercury in the traditional and mature sign of Capricorn, and very close to the superpowers of Pluto and Saturn, who are nearly conjunct. This could instigate a clash of new versus old, as a purging eruption of stubborn underlying issues are propelled to the surface, shaking the foundations of what we once considered our stable and established home. Exposure of corruption and lack of integrity within these structures may now be revealed in order to be healed. So give that some thought in terms of where the eclipse is taking place in your chart. What's really, really ready to be released now? If you've been doing your releasing work as Saturn's been moving through Capricorn, that's fantastic. You know, this may well strengthen you. For those who haven't been quite as consciously involved in their work, something may find you at this point that needs dealing with, that needs releasing, that needs removing and taking away from your life, or to be creating a challenge or an exposure of something so that you can finally see it and deal with it and get it done with. And like I say, hold on to the fact some of our best work, both individually and collectively, comes during these dark nights of the soul, essentially, rock bottom. What could be a more fitting metaphor for Capricorn? Rock bottom. It's that kind of the place where we it's so helpful when we have this energy to then propel us back up. You know, we don't want to be stuck just hovering around. We need something to push back against to help us to heal. All right, so try and see Saturn in that way if you can. So yes, we move on through. We will have the moon in opposition to Saturn and Pluto as well, which is just going to basically add in even more emotional sort of intensity to the situation. Moving on to then Sunday the 12th, and this is the big day that astrologers have been talking about for a very long time. So I thought I would take a little bit of time now, essentially to talk to you about Saturn and Pluto conjunction, and also this might be helpful for you in just if you're learning astrology or you'd like to know a bit more about planetary cycles, then hopefully this should help. So what I thought I'd do is just clear everything off for the moment and just remind you of how these cycles work. So I'm going to compare how Saturn and Pluto coming together, that has its own cycle. These two planets have a relationship to each other, as they all do, just like the sun and the moon have a relationship to each other. Now we know that the sun and the moon cycle is around about a month, okay? And it starts with the new moon, and the new moon is the conjunction of moon and sun, okay? What then happens 7 days later, the moon has now moved down here, and this creates that square aspect that we talk about, that tension. It's called the first quarter square. And when you look up in the sky, you'll see a semicircle. The moon will look like a semicircle. This is called the crisis of manifestation. We've sown these seeds metaphorically at the new moon. And this is like a hurdle and a challenge point. It's a test to say, how much do you really want this? You've got to really prove it. So it's a very kind of crisis-provoking time. 7 days later, the moon will then move into the opposition. Halfway through the cycle, we have the full moon, okay? So the moon is now receiving the total energy from the sun. She's a receptive yin energy, and the sun is the masculine, expressive energy. So he's shining out his light, and at this point, she's receiving the total energy. So she's completely illuminated. And this is that peak moment. She's been growing in size all of this time up until this point. So, you know, it's been helping to bring something into being, okay? It's a manifesting time. 7 days after that, she is then in another square aspect, okay, as you can see. And this is when she's in her waning phase. Whoops. She's in her waning phase. So she's been shrinking. After the full moon, she's shrinking down and she's reducing in size. So at this point, again, we see the semicircle in the sky, this time on the other side. And again, we hit a hurdle. We are at the point of the full moon has brought us some wisdom. It's brought something into being. It's brought us some information or knowledge or, you know, a peak event. And we have to now process this. We have to integrate this into ourselves. Like, what do I do with this new thing that's come about? So as she's reducing in size, she's helping to take that message deep down within us and help us to digest it, essentially, so that we can choose, essentially, what are the bits we want to keep? What are the vitamins and the nutrients from the meal we ate, right? And what are the bits we need to release? So this is the point where we have the test, the crisis of integration. What are we really ready to integrate within ourselves, and what are we ready to release? Because both are very challenging. So we have this decision point, we have this challenge again, and then she's reducing, waning in size, reducing and reducing and reducing, and then boom, we find another new moon. Okay, so that's the cycle that takes place over the course of a month between the moon and the sun. So we're now going to look at the same kind of relationship, but this time we're going to look at Saturn and Pluto. So if we take that 1 month chunk of time for the sun and the moon and we expand that out to cover, let's say, roughly 35 years. So a cycle of Saturn and Pluto in the same respect is between 33 and 38 years. So we'll just call it 35 for argument's sake for now. So lots of astrologers are talking about and making comparisons with the Saturn and Pluto conjunction throughout history. And there are an enormous amount of information out there for you to explore. So I thought what I'd do is I'd have a look at this particular Saturn-Pluto conjunction specifically, and this cycle of Saturn and Pluto, and really hone in on that. So the current Saturn and Pluto connection that we're going to have on the 12th is taking place in the sign of Capricorn. Okay, what is Capricorn? And this, of course, is where the nodal axis is as well, the south node and the north node, creating those eclipses. The eclipses we've been having are in Cancer and Capricorn. So Capricorn represents structure. It represents the systems and structures of our lives, of ourselves, of society. It's quite a stable, historical, traditional, loving, mature energy, because it's ruled by the sign of, by the planet Saturn. So Saturn's very, very powerfully placed here because he's in his home sign. It adds a little bit of extra welly to the whole situation. Yeah, and Saturn loves to achieve things. So Capricorn is the status that we achieve in life, our standing in society, our position. And it rules the kind of the structures of our civilization, as it were. The current structure, of course, we could say was capitalist. Okay, so the world tends to work on and around money. And that's, you know, that's the kind of thing that's associated with the sign of Capricorn. Wanting to make those achievements, wanting to really get somewhere in life, get to the top of the mountain. But it tends to represent that very kind of triangular hierarchical system where there's the boss at the top. Saturn kind of likes to be the boss, really. He wants control, right? He wants to keep things in order. So it's quite a controlling kind of sign as well. So this is where our two are meeting up. Now, the last time that there was a Saturn and Pluto conjunction, it happens every 35 years, but this hasn't happened in Capricorn since January 1518, which is going back obviously a heck of a long way. So this is pretty rare in terms of astrology, although the conjunctions are happening more often in this sign. Obviously, this is pretty rare. What happened in that time historically was the peak kind of piece of news, as it were, is the Protestant Reformation, which essentially was Martin Luther, the German cleric, challenging the established power structure, the authority structure, which was at that time the Pope, the Catholic Church, the Vatican. And essentially he basically exposed the wrongdoings, the corruption of power. And this is absolutely what Pluto and Saturn energies are all about. Pluto exposes the truth. Pluto will not tolerate BS of any kind of papering over the cracks. No, it's ruthless. It's a ruthless energy, and it will just show up whatever needs to be shown up, because its whole MO is about our evolution, okay, on a personal level and as a human race, as a collective. It's interested in what goes beyond this individual's life or our particular incarnation. It's more interested in what happens in a more lasting way. So it really isn't at all shy about creating a lot of crisis and exposing things that needs to be exposed. So this was Martin Luther's exposure of the corruption, where there had been a betrayal of that truth, of the power structure. So Saturn in Capricorn, this was, you know, the Catholic Church wielding their power and abusing that power. And this obviously changed, you know, everything across Europe. Huge moment in our history. So that's the kind of energy that we're looking at here. Also, interestingly, I found out that that conjunction, same as this one, there was also Mars in Sagittarius again. So it was that attack on this fundamental underpinning belief system, this philosophy, this religion, is all Sagittarius stuff. So it's really interesting that Mars was in that position as well. And the nodes of the moon were in Gemini and Sagittarius, and that's their next place to move on to in, I think it's May this year, around about springtime of this year. The nodes will move out of Capricorn and Cancer, and we'll then start seeing the eclipses take place in Sagittarius and Gemini, just like with this previous conjunction in Capricorn. So lots of repeating themes of energy. So let's look at then the Saturn-Pluto cycle that we're currently in as though it were a moon cycle, all right? So we'll consider that Pluto is the sun, because the sun in the moon cycle is the slower moving planet, and Pluto is the slower moving planet, all right? About 250 plus years to do a full cycle of the chart. So really slow moving. Saturn is more representative of the moon, much faster moving. So that's about 30 years to go all the way around. So we'll consider Saturn as though it's the moon and Pluto as though it's the sun. So this cycle starts when these two come together, the conjunction, the new moon phase. So this happened on November the 7th, 1982, and it was actually in the sign of Libra, okay, another cardinal sign. 27 degrees. Now, what were some of the things that were happening in your life then? Could you look back, if you're old enough, and just kind of consider, you know, how has this cycle played out for you? But I'll give you some reminders of the world's themes that were going on, and we'll see some repeating themes. So one thing that I did like, because the the more pleasant thing to tap into is where we are making breakthroughs. It's often in times of greatest difficulty that we have our breakthroughs. And certainly this was the case in Venus ruled Libra, okay? We had the very first heart transplant that happened this year, which I thought was lovely symbology with it being in Libra. And imagine the change that that's made throughout the world. Absolutely incredible. It was also the start of the Falklands conflict, which of course was something that our country, that the UK got involved in quite heavily. That was kind of, I think, the last real active one-to-one war, essentially, that the UK has been involved in directly. And also it was when Israel invaded Lebanon, which was quite a potent moment as well. So lots of, and you will hear this quite a lot with the Saturn-Pluto conjunctions, there tends to be a bit of a war theme, unfortunately. So we then move on to what would essentially be the first quarter moon phase. So this took place between March 1993 and January 1994. It's spread out over that period of time because of the way the planets retrograde backwards and forwards. So it would have actually been a protracted kind of alignment at that time. So at this point, Saturn has now moved on to the sign of Aquarius, and Pluto has moved on just a little bit into Scorpio. So fixed signs, and we've got the first quarter square. Now, Pluto is strong in Pluto's home sign of Scorpio. Again, like with the Saturn situation we have now, gives it a bit more welly, okay, a bit more influence in that sign. Well, a lot happens at this time. So this is that quarter square crisis point. And what we saw happening here from my studies, we had the Waco siege. We had the car bomb outside the World Trade Center buildings. So it's that first time that the World Trade Center had been attacked, was during this energy. We had Rodney King, who was beaten to death by police, starting off this real kind of issue around the way that the police perhaps abuse their power, their authority over the Black community, and this sparked outrage around the world. It was the peak in fighting and the absolute atrocities that took place in the Bosnian War between the Serbs and the Croats. And the UN at this point imposed sanctions on Serbia because of what they were witnessing happening over there. So some pretty dark stuff going on, as is typical of Pluto and typical of Scorpio. But like I say, the dark night of the soul often propels us to move forward. So that was the first quarter square. Then we get to what is essentially the opposition, so like the full moon aspect. This took place with Saturn now in Gemini, okay, and with Pluto in Sagittarius, okay. So now we're back in this Sagittarius territory of those fundamental beliefs and religion and that kind of thing. So this was a peak moment, again, between Israel and Palestine and their conflict. A pretty right-wing leader was elected, Ariel Sharon, who got a pretty much landslide victory, but he separated, he cut ties with Yasser Arafat, and it was quite a pivotal moment in the ongoing saga that we have between Israel and Palestine. Interestingly, at this point, Slobodan Milosevic appears in The Hague for the war crimes that he committed during the fighting between Bosnia and Serbia. So things kind of, there's that repeat cycle of things that we see showing up. He's accused of war crimes, obviously. And another repeating theme, obviously, we have the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center attack. Again, on the previous quarter, we'd had that first attack with the car bomb, and this time we have those two planes flying into the Twin Towers, and of course sparking the war on terror and this invasion and we're still in that energy right now. So this was that peak moment, the full moon, things really coming to a fruition point, and as we would see with the full moon. So the third quarter, more recent times now, the third quarter crisis point was in November of 2009, and that lasted until August 2010. Now, at this point, Saturn's moved around to 1 degree of Libra, and remember I say that the beginning degrees of those cardinal signs, Libra, Capricorn, Aries, Cancer, that's the world axis. So this was really potent. Saturn on at the beginning of Libra, 1 degree, and Pluto has now moved into Capricorn. All right, 1 degree, just moved in. And of course, what do we have? We have the world economic crisis. It's like, okay, we really have to start learning and integrating and moving towards a newer way of doing things. That's the essence of the third quarter square place. It's really about, come on, we're getting ready for change. We have to do things in a different way. Pluto wants death and rebirth. So in Capricorn, it's the death and rebirth of the existing structures, the power structures, the authority. And of course, the financial system. You know, we're in a capitalist structure. We're in a society across the world that revolves around money. And so we see a worldwide economic crisis at this time. It's also the official end of the war in Iraq that was started at the opposition. The peak of the financial crisis we see most profoundly in Ireland, and Greece in particular got hit so hard, devastating consequences for Greece that, you know, and many countries still desperately trying to recover from this situation. And I think this is going to be a big part of the fact that we'll have Saturn and Pluto meeting up in the same sign this weekend. It's also very interestingly, this was the time when we had the exposure of US Army information via Julian Assange WikiLeaks. So he was provided with information from Chelsea Manning. And so this was this peak sort of exposure of authority, potentially corruption of that power and authority that we saw. And I wonder if things perhaps might come to a conclusion now with the conjunction with regards to that too. So that was the last quarter, and of course, bring us up to date. We're back at another new start. We start a new cycle. Here we are. What are we going to do going forwards? So I hope that's been helpful. Just to give you some ideas, really, just some themes to consider, because, you know, the role of an astrologer, it isn't to stand here and tell you that's going to happen and this is going to happen. That would be arguably a little foolish. Essentially, the planets have influences, a variety of potentialities that can play out, okay? And we're really trying to distill and translate into language for everyone else what those potentialities could look like. And we have to take so many variables into account. Each planet has a set of potentialities. Each combination with all of the other planets does. Each placement in terms of sign and house, all of those things can play out in a multitude of different ways. And it's a wonderful tool to have. And, you know, my Twitter handle is Astrology Empowerment, because astrology for me is a wonderful tool that I really think that everyone should have. I think it's an extremely empowering skill. that we can use to really help our development in life. And as such, what I want to do is to kind of present to you, translate to you, what are all the potentialities, give you all the ingredients and say, you make the dish, you know, that's right for you. I can't give everybody a personal reading, so I can't see everybody's individual natal chart and say, this is how this is going to play out for you, unless you book a personal reading for me, in which case I can narrow it down a bit. So essentially what I'm doing with these general forecasts is saying, look, here's the energies that are out there. Here's how they're connecting with each other. How they play in your chart, though, that's where you need to do a little bit of work. So find out where 19 degrees of Cancer is in your chart. And if you've got anything around that degree, or in Aries, Libra, Capricorn at the same degrees, that's where things are really happening. So let's have a look at what the themes of Cancer and Capricorn are, because this is the two opposing energies and this is where the nodes are. Well, Capricorn, we've had a bit of a look at. It's about security and structure and stable. It's walls. It likes walls and things that are built to last, okay? Support, okay? Tangible physical support. Cancer, of course, we're in more emotional territory. This is how we feel in life, how secure we feel. It's our family and our home life. So this is kind of what we're doing out there in the world, on the world stage. And this is more the private, what goes on behind closed doors, where we've come from, all right? What's our home all about? And we have to find the right balance between those, particularly as the world becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. These two are coming closer together. And really, you know, the world used to seem like a very big place, and we spent more time in the home, and this is changing. And we have to start looking at the whole of the world as our home and everybody in it as our extended family. I think this is a theme that we've seen coming up. So that connection. The other thing I forgot to mention actually at the last quarter square with Saturn and Pluto was that was also the last time that there was a record-breaking bushfires in Australia. So we've got a repeating theme from that one as well. So yeah, looking at how the current system and the current structure affects what is essentially our home. How is it providing for us? Because this is where home is where we are fed and kept safe and kept secure. We have a roof over our head. We're protected from the elements. We're protected from everything going on out there. We're fed and nourished. We feel safe and we can rest and restore ourselves. Okay, we can feel secure within as well as without through the trappings of life. So, you know, it's really about, it boils down to two things. Capricorn is strength, strong, and Cancer is where we come from. It's our roots. So if we're planting something new with this Saturn and Pluto conjunction, we want it to have strong roots. So what's getting in the way of that? What's old and tired and worn out and needs to be released? Because it's not really the truth of how things should work. Okay, what needs to just really be let go of so that something new could come around? So the structure, the system of our society really should be something that's supportive, all right? We need solid things to push ourselves and hold ourselves, okay? So it should be supporting. Is our current structure supporting the safety needs, those basic kind of survival needs of our extended family? Does our extended family have shelter from the environment, or do we see a lot of homelessness? Do we have a lot of people in refugee camps, that kind of thing? Does the current system provide everyone with sufficient food and water, or is everybody getting nourished? Is it, you know, providing that security, food security? No, it's not really doing that either. we are all connected, essentially. We are all family. Something has got to change. And when there's an excess in one side, there's a deficit in the other side. That's where exploitation happens. In order for certain parts of society to have a lot of something, someone else has to go without. And as our world gets smaller, the repercussions and consequences of that, which is a very Saturnian kind of influence. Saturn is a very, very karmic planet. It produces the results of the work and the efforts that we've made. And they're very lasting and very enduring efforts. So if we've done our work, we get really well rewarded. And if we haven't done our work, there's consequences. There's some negative karma. So, it's time to come to a balance point. And yes, we're humans and we don't do that easily. So perhaps a crisis will be provoked. But let's hope that we can learn our lessons as early as possible and really, really, really make this a point where it's a start of something incredibly powerfully strong that supports the growth of us all. That's my wish for this Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And I hope it is for you too. Give it your own thoughts though. Come up with how you synthesize this, what it means for you, what are the houses that these signs occupy in your chart, so how can you blend in and refine down the process. Thanks so much for watching. I hope it's been really helpful to you and interesting. Keep watching me, give me some support, give me a like, a love, a share, a comment, give me some feedback, and keep grounded. This is a tumultuous week, so just keep your feet on the ground and just focus on the good, the phoenix that rises from the Pluto ashes. That's what it's all about. So lots of love. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I will see you next week.